Now let's look at equation with surds. Now surds are roots. These are surds, okay? So this is what we're going to be looking at in this part, and this will be the final part of these basic equations. Now, I'll show you a little bit of an introduction so you get the idea and you don't get worried with the question too much. Now, if you have, say, root x equals 2, I'll just give you an example, equals to, 3. Now this is a square root. This is called a square root. Yeah, for most of you will probably know already. It's called a square root. There's a little invisible 2 here. If there's nothing there, it's a square root with an invisible 2 there. So, in order to get rid of the square root, we need to square both sides. Okay, remember guys, when we had x squared is 9, we square rooted both sides. So when we square root it, we get plus or minus 3, right? But here we do the opposite. We have to square instead of square rooting. So this becomes 9, and the square root and the square, they actually cancel itself out. So we just have x left. If you square it, the square root disappears. That's the key thing. So the answer is just x equals to 9. That's the answer. Alright, and here guys, I know you thought that we just simply square rooting the 9 and get rid of the square. That's the same thing. I'm square rooting both sides, yeah, with the plus or minus, and the square root and the square again cancels itself. That's why we just have x. Okay, so that's the background behind it. So we're doing the same thing to both sides. Now another thing is sometimes you have cube roots. Sometimes you have something like this. Yeah, this is called a cube root. Yeah, so you probably already know, I think, but that's a cube root. Say for example it's equal to 2. When you see a cube root there, what would you do to both sides? You're not going to square it like you did here because it's not a square root. You would cube it. So you have to cube it, cube both sides, and the cube root and the cube will cancel to just have x, and 2 cubed is 8. That's the answer. Okay, so you've got to remember what the root is, if it's square root, if it's cube root, and you power it to the same number. Okay, so that's the idea. Not too hard, it's actually really, really simple. So let's use that to answer the questions. Starting with 50. Actually I think that's the one I told you, isn't it? Square root of x is 3. We need to square it. So we square it, and this side will just, if I square it, this side will just cancel the square root and the square. So it's just x left over. And here we square 3, which is just 9. Okay, so x is just 9. Easy peasy. 51. Okay, don't worry about what's inside the square root. It could be really big, but don't worry about it. It's a square root, so we simply square. So we have x, if I square this side, the square root and the square cancel, so we just have x minus 1 left, and 2 squared is 4. Okay, so x minus 1 is 4, so x is 4 plus 1, which is 5. Okay, so x is 5. 52. Okay, again, don't worry about what's inside the square root. Just know that we're going to square both sides. So this side, we only have this left over, and we square the 5, which is going to be 25. So I'm going to move the 3 onto the other side by subtracting it, which makes it 22. So 2x is 22. X will be 22 divided by 2, which is 11. Okay, and that's it. Again, what's inside the bracket? Sorry, not the bracket, square root. We're square rooting, so I'm going to square both sides. The square root and the square cancels. So on my left hand side, I just have 2 minus x. And here I have 3 squared, which is 9. And now I'm going to move the 2 over to the other side by subtracting it, which makes it 7. Now I don't want negative x, I want x. So move the negative over to the other side, which makes negative 7. So x is negative 7. Okay. 54, do the same thing, exact same thing. So I'm going to square both sides. So that will cancel. We just have this left. X squared minus 1 equals to x plus 1 squared. Now I'm going to see if I can expand that out, which will be like that. For those who don't know how to expand this one, this is x plus 1, isn't it? So you do your usual thing. X times x is x squared, x times 1 is x, 1 times x is x, and 1 times 1 is 1. And you can see that x plus x is 2x, so that's how I simplify it to get this. Okay? Just an expansion of this. And now you can see that the x squares actually cancel out, because x squared minus x squared is 0. And then you can see that, yeah, x squares I got rid of, and you can see that if I move the 1 over to this side, I get negative 2. So 2x equals to negative 2. So x will be negative 1. 2x divided by 2 is negative 1. And that's it. So it's the same thing over and over again. Okay. Now this is actually the question example that I gave you at the beginning, so all of you should know the answer. But this time, what are we doing? We're cube rooting. So we must cube both sides. And you know that this will cancel out. So we just have x equals to 2 cubed, which is 8. So x is 8. Okay, so very, very simple. And finally, again, we're cube rooting. So we must power it with 3. We must cube it. So this cube root and the cube cancels. We just have x plus 1 left, and that's equal to 3 cubed, which is 27. 3 cubed is 27. So move the 1 over to the other side by subtracting, and it will be 26. So x is 26 is the answer to this question. How easy is that? That's all you need to remember, alright? And that's it. That concludes the final part of the basic equations.